I would say that I underwent a paradigm shift around 2008 when I came across Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. The symmetrical and freefall collapse of World Trade Center Building 7, which was not hit by an airplane, is 100% proof that our government lied to us, and that none of our institutions are there to expose or protect us from this vile conspiracy that stretches across and controls many nations. Steel-constructed skyscrapers cannot collapse from small office fires symmetrically and at freefall speeds. It's impossible. 9/11 proves that our government and its owners control the narrative, the media, the military, the police forces, and all other major institutions. Yes, the 9/11 conspiracy is indeed a frightening truth. Moreover, any supposed social contract we once had with our government ended on 9/11. The United States government was in the very least an accessory in this heinous crime, which was not only used as a pretext to murder millions, but also to deprive all Americans and future generations of liberty under the threat of a manufactured boogeyman. Despite my vehement distrust of the U.S. government, I somehow still considered NASA exempt from the corruption. That all changed when I read David McGowan's Wagging the Moon Doggy, which thoroughly debunked the Apollo moon missions. I loved space too. I really wanted to believe in NASA, but the evidence that NASA lied is indisputable. NASA is a criminal organization that steals $59 million per day under false pretense. Seriously, how can any intelligent person think that this is genuine footage of a spaceship in lunar orbit? NASA is a scam. In addition, any reverence I had for academia ended with Wagging the Moondoggy, as no major institution has ever pointed out the blatant lie. The lunar lander is a piece of junk made from curtain rods, aluminum foil, tar paper, scotch tape, some useless, space-looking abstract art sculptures, and some very poor construction. Does that really look like a spaceship to you? Look at the astronauts suspended by wires. The wires are visible throughout the Apollo missions. Look at the telltale signs of 1960s movie backdrops used throughout all of the Apollo missions. Research how the inverse square law of light and how that proves the moon landings were fake. Then around April 2015, I had a larger paradigm shift. A friend of mine and a fellow NASA moon landings debunker, who many of you know as Jibby Jedi, sent me an email to check out a video by Mark Sargent. I was highly skeptical, but I soon realized that there was enough substance to the flat Earth that we needed a Socratic debate on the subject. Accordingly, I opened a debate on an internet forum where I invited flat earthers and globe earthers to present their best cases. At that time, I thought the flat Earth was a government-controlled psyop to discredit moon landing debunkers, and I wanted to save my fellow truth seekers from the government psyop. Wow, was I wrong. The flat Earth arguments were well-reasoned and substantial. Globe Earth arguments were circular, specious, and vacuous. I thought the globe advocates, whose numbers far outweighed the flat earthers, would destroy the flat earthers. But instead of presenting a strong case in favor of the official globe narrative, globe supporters relied on name-calling, fraudulent videos, feeble presuppositions, strawman arguments, conformity, and incessant appeals to authority. From the beginning, I heard the best case the globe had, and it was shockingly pathetic, and it still is. We already know that the evil cabal can get away with huge lies. 9/11, Gulf of Tonkin, and the phony moon landings prove that. But I want to talk to you about what I have termed institutionalized conformity. It is the top-down, systematic, institutional conditioning of humanity from cradle to grave, and it created the globe. Institutional conformity is founded on a blend of three elements: the knee-jerk Pavlovian response, group conformity, and the expert. These three elements have worked in tandem to force society into an unwitting love affair with the globe and space. Many of you are already familiar with the Pavlov's dogs experiment. Essentially, at the end of the 1800s, Ivan Pavlov was able to condition dogs to salivate every time a metronome was played. Pavlov did this by bringing out food while simultaneously playing a metronome. Only after a few repetitions, Pavlov removed the food, but the dogs would still salivate in response to just the sound stimulus. This is referred to as classic conditioning. Of course, we are not dogs, but to an extent, people can also be conditioned. Humanity has been conditioned to love space and the globe. That's a fact. You have seen the globe and other space images thousands of times in your life. In addition to loving space and the globe, you have been programmed to scoff at even the mere mention of the flat Earth through unrelenting, repeated conditioning since childhood in schooling, media, and entertainment. Although the narrative is changing from Columbus to ancient Greece, I was taught in elementary school that everyone knew Columbus was going to fall off the edge. But the smart Columbus knew better than the stupid flat earthers, and Columbus proved it was a globe. Even MTV's rebellious channel always started with the U.S. government's Apollo mission to the moon. How rebellious is that? The programming has been unrelenting and everywhere. Public schooling and the grading system were instrumental in creating your inflated globe ego and that conditioned response. But here's a question for you. How do you know when you're having a conditioned Pavlovian response? A Pavlovian response isn't based on reason or intellect. Instead, it triggers a knee-jerk emotional response. It makes you upset or happy in some inexplicable manner. Hopefully, by recognizing that you are having a Pavlovian response, you can set aside the conditioning and instead use your intellect and reason to investigate the flat Earth. Here's a hilarious television experiment that took place in a medical office. All of these people are actors except for the lady. Whenever the office buzzer rings, all of the actors stand up. Yes, I added the cartoon ball. It's like Pavlov's dogs, but here the group is establishing the norm. Understandably, the unaware lady quickly follows the group. That's expected, and I doubt any of us would have acted differently, as we often look to the group for information. It's called informational conformity. But what's so fascinating about this is that this lady, after all the actors leave, then teaches others who are also unaware to do the same and creates an entirely new group of conforming, unwitting people. None of the people standing up right now are actors, and yet they are all engaging in the same nonsense based solely on group and informational conformity. Comparably, relatively few people need to be in on the globe lie. Once the narrative has been initiated, which is then reinforced every day in school, in media, and entertainment for generations, nearly everyone will unquestioningly follow the group. They control nearly all of the inputs, and the system then becomes self-policing. It doesn't matter that no one in the group knows why they believe or act in a certain way. The narrative has already been set and is followed religiously by the group in lockstep. Conformists are rewarded and promoted, and nonconformists are ridiculed and demoted. That's why calling flat earthers names is so important to this control mechanism. But the globe needed one more key ingredient, and that's the expert. The Milgram experiment is a fascinating example of the power of institutionalized conformity. In this case, the oblivious person at the electric shock generator called the teacher. Remember, this teacher is the only person who isn't an actor. A learner is placed in a different room. Each time the learner makes a mistake in his responses, the so-called teacher is instructed to give an increasing electric shock to the learner. In a way, it reminds me of the grading system. Via a microphone, the teacher can hear the fake screams when the supposed electric shock is administered to the learner. What you're watching is a modern version that obtained the same results as the original Milgram experiment. There were 30 switches on the shock generator marked from 15 volts, slight shock, to 450 volts, danger, severe shock. 450 volts is at a fatal level. On purpose, the learner gave mainly wrong answers. And for each wrong response, the oblivious teacher gave the learner an electric shock, and the teacher could hear the screaming through the microphone. If the teacher refused to administer a shock, the expert in the lab coat next to the teacher would say something like, "Please continue," or "You have no other choice but to continue." After 15 shocks or so, the learner in the other room would go silent so as to create the illusion that the learner was unconscious, or worse. But the shocks continued. What's so damn disturbing is the fact that 65% of the teachers continued to the highest level of 450 volts, which was identified as danger severe shock. All of the teachers continued to 300 volts. Despite their morals, ordinary people are likely to follow orders given by an authority figure, the expert. Milgram summed up the experiment as follows. The legal and philosophic aspects of obedience are of enormous import, but they say very little about how most people behave in concrete situations. I set up a simple experiment at Yale University to test how much pain an ordinary citizen would inflict on another person simply because he was ordered by an experimental scientist. Stark authority was pitted against the subject's strongest moral imperatives against hurting others. And, with the subject's ears ringing with the screams of the victims, authority won more often than not. The extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of the study and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. Authority won more often than not. Remember that 65% of the participants thought they severely injured or killed the other person based only on the simple orders of the scientist with the white coat. That's the power of the expert. And that's why the cabal has created so many celebrity experts like Einstein, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye the Science Guy, Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, and others. George Orwell spoke about the expert this way: "It will be seen that my reasons for thinking that the earth is round are rather precarious ones. It does not rest on reasoning or on experiment, but on authority. Most people, if asked to prove that the earth is round, would not even bother to produce the rather weak arguments I have outlined above. They would start off by saying that everyone knows the earth to be round, and if pressed further, would become angry. This is a credulous age, and the burden of knowledge which we now have to carry is partly responsible." The power of institutionalized conformity is evident in the following example. In this video, you can hear the child proclaim that the so-called space rocket is actually falling down, as it truly is. Just listen.
It's drifting. That's bad.
It's doing good so far.
Is it? Is that what always happens? Does it always go like that?
Yep.
It looks bad to me. It's in space, or is it? Is that it?
Yep, I think that's it.
Rockets don't go to space. They arc and fall into the water, as you can see in numerous examples. The child gets it because he hasn't been programmed extensively enough to unquestioningly accept NASA. Instead, the adult won't allow himself to question his many years of space indoctrination, even though his eyes tell him otherwise. Here's from another video with a different child. The child keeps stating that the space shuttle rocket is going down, but the parent tries to explain it away as though the earth is churning.
Oh no, it's going down!
What a mark.
That was so loud. It's going down!
Peter, for Sandy, is it turning or is the earth spinning?
A rainbow.
Sandy? It's not turning, the earth is spinning. Sandy?
Already.
That's going straight up, it's just the earth is turning, we're moving away from it.
Truly, the children were wiser than their parents who refused to see the obvious. The children could easily recognize that the rocket is not going into space, but the parents would not allow themselves to question it. What do your eyes tell you? Just look at this space shuttle launch. Does any person here really think that this space shuttle is in space? It's laughable. Do you understand what I mean by institutionalized conformity and how powerful it is and how we need to be wary of it? I need you to set aside your Pavlovian response, your conditioning, your group conformity, your NASA and other proclaimed expert authority figures, and just use your intellect here today, as an objective, reasonable person should.